Salam, Tharik.
Salam. Thank you for having me on, bro.
Thank you for joining us on the podcast. So I want to jump straight in because I think the conversation we're going to have today centers for me around a lot of things that I think are quite interesting and also important to myself. So travel, Muslim heritage, and then also I guess a bit of Islamophobia at some point.
Yeah.
But if we
wouldn't be a podcast without it.
It wouldn't be the Muslim vibe without a conversation about Islamophobia. But I guess to start off with right at the beginning, you are a travel writer, and you've written for the Muslim Vibe actually quite some time ago.
Yeah.
And various other kind of Muslim platforms. But then you kind of went big time mainstream and started doing work with Lonely Planet, BBC, and various others. And I think for a lot of people, it'd be interesting. There's a couple of things. I mean, firstly, I want to be able to explore and discuss, and I guess make the argument for travel, because I feel like a lot of Muslims nowadays will go on like a religious pilgrimage, will go to their motherland, wherever that might be, and then the odd like Dubai trip with their friends or family. And that's it.
I think what you're talking about is a distinction between going on holiday and traveling. And we both know that there is a big difference.
Yeah.
You know, going on holiday would be something that is pre-arranged. It's normally a package holiday. Most things are booked in advance. Whereas travel, of course, it's that kind of, cliched image of someone with a backpack and just wandering, the earth and making it up as they go along almost. You might have a final destination. You might have bought a few plane tickets, but you're kind of doing it off the cuff. And I think that's the big difference in the way. I
was going to say what's really interesting as well is that whenever I've traveled, the first question people have always asked, like, are we going to about food? Like, there's not going to be halal restaurants there.
That's because you're a Muslim, bro. All Muslims think about is food. When they talk about anything being halal, they're actually just talking about their food, isn't it?
Basically, that's what it is, right? And I think it's really interesting. And the experience I've had, at least, that whenever I've traveled, like my wife and I have been to, we went kind of the first few years after marriage, we went every year to like a random country. So we went to Colombia, Japan, Malaysia's not that random, but we went to Borneo and there we did a lot of the kind of caves and all this kind of stuff. We tried to do kind of different holidays.
Yes.
And again, to be honest, it got to a point where I think after that we were like, we just want to go to Dubai. We just want halal food. We want a holiday. We want to relax. But the adventure and the kind of like when you experience a different culture, and this is the thing, I wanted to start just talking about travel because I personally feel that when you experience a vastly different culture to your own, and you're entirely out of your element, you kind of on one level realize your insignificance in the world, like how small you are, and it's very humbling. And then at the same time, it just opens this whole kind of window to the world.
Indeed.
And the diversity that truly does exist, and there's so much learnings to take from different cultures and everything else.
Well, so, to be honest, like if we go back to the first article that I did write for you guys, that's what it really explored, didn't it?
Yeah.
And I don't expect you to remember every article that's been published on your site, but that's exactly
10 things
exactly and
Muslims should know about traveling.
And we spoke about the kind of real benefits and real rahmah and real kind of beauty of traveling and what it can do for you as an individual, as a character. I don't think it's any coincidence that part of the quote unquote training of those who engage with the more spiritual, mystical, aspects of Islam, that part of the training is to travel, is to wander. Historically, traditionally, if you look at the great mystics of the world, whether it's Al-Ghazali or whether you look at, others that we could name, that's what they did. Even the guy we're going to talk about later, Evliya Çelebi, the Ottoman traveler, Evliya is actually a kind of sort of Turkish take on Awliya, which of course, is a Sufi term for the friends of Allah. And this is why he initially started traveling. Because the more you travel, the less you have any kind of attachment and anchorage to the dunya. That's one of the key reasons why you see it in the mystical tradition. But of course, in this day and age, we also travel for various other reasons. We travel because we want to enjoy the dunya as well, So there's lots of different reasons, but it's that immersion, I think, that you're alluding to that really, people enjoy when they truly travel. When you immerse yourself in local culture, when you have to live with hardship, when you don't have the things that you take for granted, that actually tests you in a way that you wouldn't normally be able to do in this safe little bubble that we all live in now.
I think it's also, for me at least, quite a refreshing break. You know, when you get away from, and again, I'm thinking back more to like 10 years ago or so when I was traveling, you didn't have easily accessible internet.
Exactly.
I remember going to internet cafes, having to like email my parents and things like that. Like that was what was nice about it. As I said, it's like the immersion into this new world.
And coming out off the grid.
And completely detaching from everything you knew and everything else, right? It's a strange experience, but I think, you know, for me, the first thing I wanted to kind of at least get out of the way was just making the point that I think, you know, for people that haven't traveled, for people that have, as you say, holidays are one thing. You can go to the most remote parts of the world and find a 5-star resort. That's not what we're talking about. No. I think it's about really, you know, getting in as much as you can.
And taking yourself out your comfort zone, Salim.
Exactly.
Because that's the key. I think, you know, the character development happens when you are out of your comfort zone. And this can happen in many ways, but you can do it in travel in safe ways. As long as people go and do that research. Like you said, me and you were traveling in the days of pre-internet, which makes us sound like ancient dinosaurs, and maybe we are, you know, but we had to rely on our wits, but we also had to go and do the research beforehand. And I think in this day and age, one of the things that we have is, you know, with that black box, as they call it in media, the phone in our hands and everything is there, it gives us this false sense of security, and it also makes us a little bit lazy. You know what I mean? Whereas, you know, I was wandering around with dog-eared Lonely Planet guides. That's how I got about. It was that really good research that gave me the confidence to wander into a kind of rural part of, I don't know, Southeast Asia and not feel out of my too out of my depth. Obviously a little bit. But not so uncomfortable that I'm worried or I'm panicked, you know. And we're not talking about being reckless. We're talking about traveling, taking yourself out of your comfort zone, but doing it in a way where you can still enjoy it, but you do not endanger yourself. Because let's be honest, I mean, there are, you know, you do have to take precautions when you're on the road as well.
On that note, I don't know if you've seen the documentary, The Serpent, not documentary, the show, The Serpent on
amazing
series,
really terrifying,
really scary if you talk about traveling. So I just watched that recently. It just came to mind. But I guess I also wanted to ask for yourself, what kind of triggered that interest and spark when it came to traveling, and like, you know, was there a moment or was there something that was like, okay, this is why I love travel now?
I think there are a few moments that I can pick up, and I'll try and sprint through one or two. So one of the first things was, as a young person, I was really kind of into my football, and I was very, very lucky that where I was growing up in the East End of London, we had some really relatively well organised football teams, and they took us away on these amazing tours to kind of international football tournaments. Okay. And so we were the most famous one that we would go to, or the one that we enjoyed the most, was called Dana Cup, and it was out in Denmark. But what would happen is it was the third biggest youth football tournament in the world. So the whole world would come to that tournament. And I remember as a young person, it was one of the first times that I'd been able to go anywhere other than back home, as you put it earlier, right? And to just meet, you know, tall Senegalese people, like actual people from the West Indies, to hang out with Bengalis from Calcutta, to meet Colombians, you know, firsthand. I suddenly realized the world it's an amazing place. And I really want to see where these people are from. And I remember thinking that, but I had no idea how I was going to do it. I was 16, 17, 18, whatever it was. You know, so that was one of the first moments. I guess another moment would be like when my wife and I went on our honeymoon, like through a package holiday thing years and years ago to Turkey. But we both had that sense of adventure in us. So, you know, we randomly met this guy in the market whose name was Omar, and he's still good friends with us to this day. He was selling watches. Years later, funny story, my cousin goes to Turkey and bumps into him and makes the connection he's my cousin. Yeah. So this guy, right? Such a wonderful human being. He just says to us, oh, you know, you're Muslim and you're from England, blah, blah, blah. I want to show you Turkey. And we're thinking, whatever. You know, he's probably going to take us for a meal to his house. He says, meet me the next day at 7 a.m. And then he takes us on this 2-day road trip through Turkey to his like ancestral village, and then to his friend's home in Izmir. And suddenly we're kind of drifting around Turkey with him and his kids, and I just felt like, wow, you know, what an amazing human being. And there are so many of these out there all over the world. And I guess it's what I'm trying to say is that fear I might have had of the world, that's when it began to dissipate. And that's when I began to realize that I really want to go out there and see it all. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, those are definitely two moments that kind of had a massive impact in that respect.
That's awesome. I think there's always, like when you were talking, I have a very similar memory from Egypt.
Yeah.
Where I was looking for a restaurant. I'd just reached my hotel. I was traveling on my own. I'd reached my hotel and I was looking for a restaurant, and this dude was standing outside his shop, and he was like, "Oh, I'll take you to a restaurant." I'm like, "Oh God, I'm gonna get scammed here. I don't know how, but I'm gonna get scammed." And he was like, "Let me take you." Yeah. I was like, "Okay, cool, whatever." We went to this really nice restaurant. He ordered. It was all in Arabic. I had no clue. I was like 17, 18 at the time, 18 I think. And he ordered the food, and I'm like, "Oh God, I'm gonna get hit with like a 50." And he ate as well. I'm like, "Oh my God, he's scamming me. He's gonna hit me with a £50 bill. I'm gonna have to foot it." And he paid the bill. I was like, "Okay." In fact, no, he made me pay my portion, which is fair.
Yeah, fair
he
enough.
paid his. Then he took me to like a nice like shisha cafe. We sat there. We barely spoke because language barrier. We had chai. We had like a. And then he's like, "Oh, come into my shop now." And I was like, "Okay." He's like, "I want you to meet my son." So I'm like, "Okay, cool." His son spoke English, so we had a bit of a conversation.
Nice.
And the son was like, just showing me the stuff. He's like, "Oh, you don't have to buy anything. Like, my dad just thought you were lost and wanted to help you out." And like the whole time, I felt really bad because the whole time I'm like, "This guy's gonna scam me. He's gonna steal my kidney. He's gonna kill me." You know how like my mum. Like,
This is why you got to stop watching things like The Serpent, bro.
This is the thing. No, but you hear horror stories and like your parents always telling you, don't talk to strangers, whatever. And especially when you're abroad and you can't speak the language, it can be quite alarming. But what I've seen and what I've realized is that actually a lot of people are very good and very decent.
100%.
And you have to be wise and you have to be smart.
Yeah.
But as you said, like you have crazy things happen and the most amazing stories will come out of these experiences. Definitely. But you have to kind of put yourself out there.
Yes, and not just put yourself out there as well, but also sometimes go with your gut. I think the more we travel as well, the more we develop an instinct for these things, and sometimes obviously when you're starting out, it's also good to do that little bit of research and know the kind of areas where these kind of shady characters are likely to be hanging about. And if you do that kind of research and go out there, then obviously you're reducing the odds of getting skanked. But the reality is when you're on the road, you are going to get skanked. You're going to get bumped every now and then, and you're going to get done over every now and then. As long as it isn't nothing too cynical or too harmful, that's part and parcel of travel as well.
If it's one kidney, you've got a second. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So coming back to kind of your kind of professional journey, I think what's interesting is that, as I said, you started out and you've been working in journalism for a long time or in the media for a long time, but I think the transition from writing articles for platforms like the Muslim Vibe to then me seeing on your Facebook that suddenly you're writing for Lonely Planet. That's not like a thing that happens very normally. And I think for a lot of people that's also kind of like, I know at one point in my life that was a dream of mine, that I would love to be able to write for Lonely Planet, because whenever you go on holiday, like in the airport, that's all you're seeing is just a row of Lonely Planet guides.
Exactly.
And I've used them, and you talked about traveling with dogged books. I remember, I feel like I'm just reading off countries here, but I remember when I went to China, there was like this one bit about these tailor-made suits, and it was like, in this town you take this bus, then you go here, and then it's literally like there's no road names. It's like you take the second right, and then it's the door on the left. And I was like, this can't be right. And we followed it. We get there, the door on the left was there. We went through, and I was like, I'm looking for a suit. Like, do you even know? And I got this amazing like 3-piece tailor-made suit for like 50 quid. I was like, this is incredible.
Some of the stuff that we write in there, literally, we had to go there ourselves. We had to physically, and to be honest, it's part of the contract, Salim. It's not this kind of like, some of these modern writers, they're just basing it off research that they've done on the desk. We physically go to these places. So when we tell you about a random bus that turns up once a week at 3 p.m, that's going to turn up at 3 p.m. You know what I mean? And this is what sometimes I think people in this day and age with the smartphone don't appreciate. Not everything is online.
The whole world is not.
They think they can just Google everything. But that one bus that comes once a week, unless somebody puts that information online, you're not going to find it. You know what I mean? And that's where the beauty of that kind of research was on another level. you know. But of course, in this day and age, things are changing and things are adapting. But yeah,
how did you find yourself writing for Lonely Planet? How did that come about?
So really, it was kind of I think it was about timing. You know, a lot of these we're Muslims, so it's about qadr and all of that as well. But I think a lot of it was timing, because you see, what I did was I didn't just want to write about travel. I wanted to write specifically about Muslim heritage as part of travel. So I wanted to use travel as a vehicle to encourage people to explore heritage on their travels. And I felt like that would make my writing interesting. That was my niche, shall we say. Yeah. And it just so happened that I turned up on people's radar. So I actually got invited by Lonely Planet because they were looking for somebody who was a Muslim travel expert. And of course, you know, they could have approached maybe 100 influencers if they wanted to, but they were looking for someone who knows how to do a deep dive, someone who researches, someone who looks into their history and heritage, and you know, in a way that is consistent with the Lonely Planet way. And they approached me and asked me if I would write about the Hajj initially. Because this is how it all began. They said to me, you know, we've done a Hajj guide and we need somebody who knows their stuff to look over this and make sure it's cool and understands our style and tone and whatever. And that is essentially how I got my foot in the doorway. Shortly after that, you know, they asked me if I wanted to be part of their pool of writers. So essentially what I became part of like this inner circle of writers that get commissioned to do these gigs where you go abroad and you work on the guidebooks. And having lived in Saudi Arabia myself before, when the Saudi Arabia guide became available, it was a no-brainer, because Saudi Arabia wasn't, when I did the Saudi Arabia guide, it still wasn't letting anybody into the country. There were rumors that there would be a tourism visa soon, but those rumors have been happening for 20 years. So none of us actually took it seriously at Lonely Planet. We're just like, yeah, whatever. Let's just see if you can get in there and do the book. You know, we worry about whether or not they're really opening up later. And it was a no-brainer. So they said to me, do you want to be one of our authors like you? Traveller, always dreamt of it. I was like, of course, hell yeah. Where do I sign? You know? And so I had to do this kind of mini gig, like locally, a couple of days training to prove that I could, you know, adhere to the kind of level of research and all of that. But to go back to your point about how did I make that transition, it was really, I think, you know, they could see the quality of the work, and they could also see that I had a niche and an expertise that they needed. And that's what I mean about timing. You know, we're living, the Zeitgeist of today in terms of writing is decolonize. Yeah, it's about, you know, looking for diverse perspectives, trying to get diverse voices in. And I think Lonely Planet recognized that they didn't have that. You know, and they will admit this themselves. I mean, I've gone and done talks at their headquarters and given talks about diversity. Most of their writers were white, middle class, male or female. You know, this is the convention, and they did a marvelous job. Don't get me wrong, Salim. You and I both benefited from that. But there's something to be said about a Muslim writing about Muslim heritage, Muslim cultures, Muslim communities.
So I was going to ask on that note, do you think that there's something that lends itself in the realms of travel for it to be just a kind of middle class white person thing?
When you say lends itself, what do you mean?
Like what I mean is that why do you think that Lonely Planet only had white people essentially?
Well, I guess there's two ways of looking at it. One would be that, you know, this is traditionally the domain of the slightly wealthier individuals. You know, gap year travel isn't something all of us can do.
Course,
in fact, my travel history all came by slinging my kids on my back. I didn't have the privilege of being able to backpack for a year with you know, I don't know, daddy's bank account backing me or whatever, you know. And I don't mean to disrespect some of these authors that I've worked with at all. What I'm saying though is it's always like travel writing. If you go back through history, you will find that, you know, travel writing was something that was done by the wealthier classes. Because it was the wealthier classes that could travel. And it was those that were educated enough to be able to then note it down and write it. So the tradition grew out of that. So historically, it was a lot of, you know, the wealthier classes, the elites that were going to colonize places or traveling through Europe and that, and then reporting back what they saw. It grew out of that. And in the modern era, arguably, a lot of the people who are able to go out, first enjoy travel and then turn it into a profession, you need some kind of, you know, something to fall back on. And not all of us from diverse backgrounds have that. You know, I did a lot of work for nothing before I was able to start making any money from it. And not everybody has that luxury. So I was moonlighting mainly, you know.
So we did, we are going to obviously talk a little bit more about this in depth, but I think it's worth asking the question now.
Yeah.
if we're looking at as you say, like wealthier individuals who have the ability to fall back on their trust fund, family money, whatever it might be, to be able to afford themselves the ability to travel and to write about their travels.
Sure.
Do they bring their baggage with them when they're writing and when they're exploring the Far East or like the Orient, let's say? Is there going to be that bias or that kind of lens at which they're looking at this through?
That's inevitable. We all come with a bias. There's no such thing as absolute objectivity, and people who have studied this academically will tell you this. There is no absolute objectivity, and what happens is we're all brought up in some kind of tradition. We all have our own baggage. I have my baggage. I have my cultural backdrop, and that informs my perspective. The thing that I'm saying is that perspective is absent. Okay, it's not there at all.
You mean our perspective or your perspective?
Exactly.
Okay.
It's entirely absent, and therefore it needs to be there to balance things out. I'm not saying that the perspective of quote unquote the white middle class traveller isn't relevant. I'm just saying that seems to be the dominant perspective, and that can be damaging. Okay, but more importantly, if we start stepping into this now, all literary traditions they all have a foundation. They all have a backdrop that they come from. Nothing develops in a vacuum. Okay, and as I alluded to earlier, most travel writing began with colonial writing about places they visited. Okay, or the colonial classes traveling to places. Maybe they haven't colonized it, but they're writing about their travels. Yeah, exactly. Or them writing about their travels across Europe. You know, like the great journeys that they do during the period of people like Lord Byron and whatever. Right now, inevitably, as a class at the time who saw themselves genuinely superior to other races, that's going to be written into the text that they produce. And if that text then becomes the foundations of modern travel writing, you can see where I'm going with this, right? Of course, yeah. And so even the most well-meaning travel writer today is still standing on the shoulders of that literary tradition, is what I'm saying, including myself. We were joking off air that sometimes, I mistakenly use words like I discovered. I didn't discover nothing. It was already there. I just went and saw it and found it and wrote about it. And so a lot of this stuff within English language travel writing, which is the language we are dealing with here, often it's there, and it's been so normalized, it's very difficult to see unless you go and academically study it, or you go and look at the kind of historical backdrop to the literary tradition, which is why it's important to bring new voices in.
It's quite
academic.
No. It's quite a lot. It's quite a lot to think that, like you said, right? Even we can't remove our own individual cultural biases. No. And at the same time, a lot of the work that we do today, like in Islamic tradition, for example, scholars today will use the scholars of yesteryear, and build the foundation of their arguments on that. Now,
which is why we have overly romanticized Islamic history as well, Salim, if we're brutally honest. We look at everything with rose-tinted glasses sometimes, and we don't like it when somebody points out, actually, the Ottomans weren't that nice, I know you love Ertugrul, but...
Funny enough, we had an article that was kind of critiquing a bit of Turkish politics recently, and you get that whole... People are become incensed, but it's interesting. It's interesting that when you look at something which is, I think, people would perceive as being neutral, so something like travel, the fact that there is inherently...
that's what's scary.
Issues.
Everyone thinks it's neutral.
Yeah, do you know what I mean?
Dangerous.
And there was an example which we're going to get onto in a bit, which I think just perfectly kind of paints that picture. I wanted to actually just come back a little bit to some of the other work that you've done. So there was the BBC radio documentary about America's mosques. Mosques,
but
generally.
Obviously it came through one particular mosque, which we can talk about.
And this is where we had the whole I discovered joke. But what I said to you was that you actually pretty much
found the history
of this mosque that the guys who were running the center didn't even realize.
Well, they didn't realize the significance of
it. The significance. Yeah. So can you just briefly kind of tell me that story?
So this kind of to tell the story, we have to go all the way back to a journey that I did with my family in a camper van around the Baltic. So this was like, as I often do, we planned a trip around the Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. right? And we hired a camper van, and we said, right, we're gonna just go up and down. And obviously, being the history nerd that I am, I snuck in some Islamic heritage that I discovered, right? And it turns out that there are Muslims that have been living there since 1398. Right, which is pretty phenomenal when you put it there. But not only were they living there, the original villages that they lived in were still there, and I was like, "Oh my god, I have to go and see."
Was like descendants living there?
Yes, the original villages, and there are mosques, wooden mosques on sites there, Salim. That they're sitting on the site where potentially there was a mosque there 600 years ago, because they're wooden, obviously. They've been rebuilt through the ages. And these really indigenous looking mosques that look actually more like the local Orthodox churches when you look at them, except they have a little crescent on the top. But anyway, so as part of this, I ended up getting commissioned by the BBC to write about this history because it was pretty groundbreaking, and I quote unquote discovered it. And I didn't discover nothing. The Grand Mufti who was there was the person who helped me find it all. Anyway. And when I started doing the research into the BBC article, I realised that some of the descendants had made their way as part of the mass European migration to America during the turn of the last century. And so I kind of, like you do, you follow the trail and you work out, well, what's going on? Where are they? What are they doing? And it turns out they founded a mosque in Brooklyn in the early 1900s, which... because it's survived, there were other mosques founded in other places by other Muslims, but because this is the one that survived, it's the oldest surviving mosque in America. Now, the custodians are direct descendants of the original founders, but as a community, they don't really engage with it the way Muslims engage with the mosque anymore. It started to become almost like a cultural center and whatever. Yeah. And so when we went over there, and we did the radio program because off the back of it, I kind of pitched for a 2-part documentary. This is around the time Trump is running for presidency, and he's spouting about how much he wants Muslims out and blah blah blah. So obviously it was topical. It was topical to do a program about the mosques of America, and so I nearly used the word discovered again. So we kind of focused the first part on that mosque, and we focused it on another mosque called the Mother Mosque. Right, which was built by Syrians that went there during the time of when Syria was actually still part of the Ottoman Empire, and it was known as Greater Syria, and they all moved out there. And that mosque in itself has a beautiful story about how Syrian Muslims and Christians together built this mosque. So they became the first part when we did Old Mosque, and then we did one called New Mosque to give a flavour of what the spectrum of Muslims in the US are like today. But both, all the narratives were fascinating because like over here in Europe, the Islamic history of the Americas, which is something else that I ended up writing for you guys about, is just completely, ill-explored and unknown, and very few people appreciate the depth of it.
So it's quite interesting. Looking at the fact that there's very little coverage, I guess, of the history in America. Similarly, you've also looked at things in the UK and a lot closer to home. So you were telling me again before we came on air about the trails that you put together in Woking. And you said some things that even I kind of raised my eyebrows at because I just wasn't aware of.
Exactly.
And I always find it interesting when we talk about Muslim heritage, the mind always goes to first the Middle East, and then like the back home countries, because there are large established Muslim communities in the Far East and in India and that whole part of the world. Along with Africa and everywhere else. But British Muslim heritage, I think only very recently people have started to appreciate and discover and explore it. So what are the trails that you've put together in Woking?
So the trails we put together, like you say, it's amazing.
And sorry, also for people that don't appreciate what trails are, because I had to ask you as well, course, this is like an actual
trail.
Trail.
So it's an actual physical trail. So any of your listeners that might have gone to somewhere like Highgate Cemetery, where they pick up a map and they walk around and find the graves of famous people like Marx and whatever. We did a trail similar to that for the cemetery that's there, but we also did a trail where you follow the map and you go to what we know to be 3 of the most important sites of Islamic heritage in Britain. The Shah Jahan Mosque, which is the first purpose-built mosque, that beautiful white, snow white kind of Taj Mahal-like building in Woking. And then around the corner, you've got the oldest Muslim cemetery in Britain, which was founded by the same person who founded the mosque. And that was actually founded before the mosque was founded in 1884, which makes it technically the oldest piece of British Muslim real estate that we know of. Okay,
Wow.
so we, as part of the project with the Everyday Muslim project that I did the work on, we managed to get a blue plaque installed there to recognise that it's the oldest Muslim burial site in the country. But then around the corner from there, something that made you raise your eyebrows because you weren't aware, there was a Muslim soldiers cemetery. So that when all these Muslims were going out and fighting for the British Empire during the imperial period in World War I, World War II, and they were dying, there was nowhere to bury them with any degree of respect or acknowledging their rights. And so what happened is, after quite a bit of complaints and some say some German skullduggery, right, what happened is the War Commission commissioned an actual cemetery to be built near the Shah Jahan Mosque, because it was the known mosque at the time. And so you have this beautiful beautiful space now known as the Peace Gardens, because they've refurbished it and everything, where they buried 27 Muslim soldiers. 24 of them fought and died. Well, not all of them fought and died. Most of them fought and died for the British. And it turns out 3 of them fought and died for the French, which is something that had been overlooked until we came and developed the trails. And they died fighting for the French because the French government was in exile in the UK. So when they died, they were buried here. So you have all these, overlapping levels and what have you, and it's right in front of our noses. And up until now, it's been neglected. And we can go down the cynical line of why and who it benefited to not talk about this stuff. But we can do that another time. But essentially, people can go and download the maps for free, or they can turn up at the mosque, who were our partners on this exercise, or the cemetery, who were our partners. So we partnered with all the historical institutes in the area. And you can go and pick up these beautiful free maps. They're free, absolutely free. And then you can follow them around. And we've had families go there and do this with kids. We've had, we had the Oxford University turn up. I took the history department on a tour there. And they very famously turned around and said that this has the potential to decolonize British history, which was like, wow.
That's a bold statement.
This is the Oxford University History Department. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it tells you that this stuff is right there. But what's and the reason they said that is because when you start looking at the people that are buried there that have been forgotten, or overlooked, we're talking about Abdullah Quilliam, the founder of the very first mosque in this country in Liverpool. We're talking about Marmaduke Pictou, the man who probably single-handedly made the Western world realize the real true meaning of the Quran, as one of the most famous translators. Yusuf Islam, another one. I always get him mixed up with Cat Stevens, but the other translator of the Quran, who's really famous. His first name's Yusuf, and I always get the surname confused.
You just killed Yusuf Islam for me for a second.
Yeah, exactly.
Cat Stevens.
Exactly.
He's still alive, right?
Right, exactly. So it's Yusuf Ali. Okay.
Yusuf Ali.
And then you've also got Lord Headley, one of the early converts to Islam, who was obviously a lord. Then you've also got sirs in there that were converts. You've got royals in there that were converts. You've got Ottoman, one of the last Ottoman
you mentioned a princess as well, right?
She's buried there with her mum. You've got even up to the modern era. We've got Dame Zaha Hadid, the British Iraqi architect, the amazing architect.
She's buried there?
Yeah, she's buried there as well. She's on our trail, yeah. And then I told you again, using that awful word discovered, I refound the grave of a Meccan princess whose lineage goes directly back to the Prophet ﷺ. And she's half quote unquote British. She's actually half Irish, but at the time the Irish were part of the British Empire. So she's, in most sources, she's regarded as half British. But we've got somebody who's directly descended. And her lineage is spot on. We've had experts look at it. We've looked at all the sources. She's the other branch of the family that are now the royals of the Jordanian family, because they obviously claim to be direct. So it's 2 branches. And she's buried there as well. And so we put her on the trail. And what we did is, with the big hitters, because we only had so much money, with the big hitters, we did quite a deep dive on their history, their heritage, the founder of the mosque, Wilhelm Gottlieb Leitner, and people like that. And we did some mini bios so people can really appreciate it. And with the others, most people can look them up. But it's pretty phenomenal.
I was going to say, actually, coming back to something you said earlier about deep diving, and also, you made the case for why it's important. I think, what's fascinating is that one question always leads to another. So, you spoke about there being the Muslim burial ground, for example, and then you spoke about 27 people being buried there, and 3 of them came from France. And the more questions you ask, you just unravel more and more history, which I think is so fascinating and telling in its own way. Like you mentioned the princess, for example. Exactly. How did she end up in the UK? What's her journey? And there's so much rich talk about heritage, like it's all there in history, right? But I think also when we talk about deep diving, it's interesting and significant. And I want your thoughts on, because I think from the sounds of it, your kind of specific intrigues and area of expertise is in deep diving, in really getting underneath a topic and like looking at it in its entirety. Do you feel that when it comes to travel nowadays, or just generally looking at this stuff, that we've become a bit fickle? And by that I mean that, you know, like people will go to Marrakesh to go to the market, but it's for that like
that Insta shot.
The Insta shot, so they can buy that like classic Moroccan thobe and take pictures with their friends with a snake and all that kind of stuff.
Of course.
Have we lost the essence? Because also right at the beginning we were talking about the essence of travel, and you know, like the transformative effect it can have on us, and even like the spiritual. Although we didn't go deep, but it has, you know, spiritual kind of realities. And again, when you were talking, I was thinking of the hadith of the Prophet that, you know, seek knowledge even if it means going to China.
Exactly.
And I always found that to be incredibly significant, because China is just like a random part of the world. But again, there's this thing about travel and the transformative effect I think it can have. So I guess, briefly your thoughts on where we're at today. I want to say Instagram culture, but you know what I mean, like just modern travelers. Yeah,
it's clearly a kind of how can I put it? It comes out of that kind of hedonistic side of traveling, so to speak. You know, where you travel to immerse yourself in a different way to what me and you have been talking about. You know, it's the classic. What you might call the 18 to 30 club or whatever back in the day, you know what I mean? Where people go and they just want to indulge. Yeah, it's kind of an evolution of that to an extent, but also not everybody is interested in traveling the way you and I are. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Some people do just, you know, they work hard all year, they save up all their money, and
they just want to splash out.
Exactly,
and
they just want to go, and they want to take those pictures, and they want to drive those cars, and they want to climb the Burj Khalifa, and they want to buy the little trinkets and whatever, and come home, and that's absolutely fine. And there's nothing wrong with that. But that's clearly the more commercial side of travel, and we see that is the one that. Most influencers and that are geared up to try and target and engage with, because of course when you're writing, just from a writing perspective, when you're writing the top 10 things to do, the top 10 places to eat this, there is no deep dive there, and nobody wants a deep dive either. They're literally on the plane probably scrolling that list thinking, right, I'm going to eat there, I'm going to go there, and I'm going to do that, and they build up their itinerary. But of course you and I, having been, you know, brought up on the Lonely Planet guides and whatever else, it doesn't matter whether it's about Muslim heritage or that Buddhist temple or even that spiritual tree. We want to know the story behind it. You know, and that's a different type of traveler. And I think we do need to make that distinction and recognize that not everybody's going to be interested in the stuff I'm doing, just in the same way I'm not interested in the woman looking off into the distance as she takes her picture in front of whatever.
I always think that it can't be very fulfilling, that kind of checkbox thing. So, you know, like you talk about that, you know, whenever I've been anywhere, the first thing you Google is top things to do in this city, top places to eat, whatever.
Exactly.
And for me, there's almost like I think, okay, I have to do these things because like they're the most significant sides.
FOMO.
Not even FOMO, no, but you know there's something there. But
it's
not about going there, taking the picture and leaving. Like there's actually often, there's a lot of depth in the history and the culture and whatever else. And so like I remember, oh God, it's just travel story hour for me, but I remember being in Lebanon and I think it was Byblos where they've got the ancient Roman ruins of like the... I think it's Byblos. But anyways, so I remember going there and this guy came up to us like, oh, do you want a guided tour for like $25 or whatever? I was like, listen, mate, I'm all right. I actually studied like classical civilizations. So I was like, I'll be all right. I can blag it. We get there and there's just like, it's just huge ruins and there's no plaques anywhere. There's nothing. So I was like, actually, I
could have done with that guy.
Yeah, so I actually went back, like head down. I was like, I'm really sorry that I blanked you on the way up. I'll pay you 30 if you don't mention the fact. But no, like, and then we had like an amazing hour, 2 hours where he took us around and showed us everything. And I was annoyed because I actually did know half the stuff, but I just couldn't identify it because it's all just random ruins.
You don't have that local knowledge.
But it's I think like for me, if you walk through these ruins, they look amazing. And we took a bunch of pictures before, actually, because we left him, we took a bunch of pictures, and we were like, actually, we could just leave now, but let's actually learn something at the same time.
Yes.
And that's where the real added benefit is, and like where you actually open your mind, and
Exactly.
it takes you, I guess, somewhere else in your own head.
But that's not for everyone.
Yeah, I guess so.
You know, and
but
from
this is,
fear
I
of-
guess, coming back to the question, I feel like it's a waste going to a site like that or anywhere.
Exactly.
And just getting the picture,
Yeah.
because ultimately, what's that for? I mean, people nowadays don't take pictures for their own photo albums at home. They take them
That's to say you've been somewhere to show someone.
for social media consumption, right? For the likes, for the plaudits, and for
Exactly.
everything else. And I'm victim of this as well. I do
Of
this
course.
as well. Everyone does.
Yeah.
But I think deep down, we kind of need to assess ourselves. And like I've actively tried to kind of hold back on sharing everything and all my stories, and because then I've got nothing to talk to you about on a podcast, right?
Well, no, you're spot on, and obviously it is partly a victim of the age we live in. You know, we live in a very narcissistic age. You know, there's no getting away from that. You know, and you can see that we are all victims of it. I've got social media presence. I have to have it. You know, I can't survive as a travel writer if I don't have it. And so I realized that I also have to provide that kind of content for some people as well. I've done listicles. You know, I've done pictures for the sake of showing people, oh look, this amazing thing, without going too hard in on it, because not everybody is into that, and we have to also appreciate that, you know. And my wife kind of set me straight on this. I can't start sounding too much like a snob. Do you know what I mean? Like some people just want to go lie on a beach and have, you know, for want of a better phrase, have a few drinks and have a nice meal and then come home. And that's enough for some people. And that's what they want to do. But you and me, maybe, we do like to go there, and we do want to know the significance of that pile of rocks. And, you know, we want to know, because like you said, you studied classics.
Yeah.
You know, I'm a historian. You know, it's inevitable we're going to stand in front of the rocks and muse over what on earth went down, while people are just laughing like, bro, somebody just put those rocks there 5 minutes ago. What are you doing? So I think it's horses for courses, isn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, coming on to like your latest project now, and also I guess if you have you one other bit I forgot to mention was the kind of heritage stuff that you've done in Thailand.
Yeah.
And I guess you mentioned that you'd been out there during COVID or before COVID?
So it was pre-COVID.
Pre-COVID.
And I was, and this is what I meant about being able to kind of, I was in the right place at the right time. So Lonely Planet, obviously, we're looking for somebody who's a Muslim heritage expert. And sometimes, you know, even they don't know why they need somebody like me. Initially, they brought me in for the Hajj, obvious, right? Hajj, Saudi, all that kind of stuff. But then I started to point out that, you know, you're going to places and you're not covering the Islamic heritage in a way that is really representative of what's going on the ground. And part of the reason is because the people you traditionally send there, their radar isn't on that. Their radar is on something else, and that's fine. You know, like I said to you before, it's about cultural baggage. So the problem I had with Thailand, the case I made to my editor is, all we ever hear is about the Muslim insurgency in the south. All we ever hear is about the issues and the problems and the terrorism and whatever else, right? None of it really affects tourists because it's a kind of, you know, internal battle going on between the Muslims in the deep south and the police. That's what we were told. And I said, look, I want to try and change that, at least in the guides. You know, I want to go and I want to explore the history and heritage, and I want to talk about the food. I want to talk about where this stuff comes from. I want to talk about the beautiful mosques that we never see in your guides. You know, we see some. You know, Lonely Planet does cover bits and pieces. And when I did that, I was blown away. I was absolutely blown away. You know, I found myself Tomb Raider style, climbing up hills through jungles, finding like fortresses built by a sultan in the 17th century that had never been written about in an English guidebook. Yeah. You know, and I was just like, whoa, what's going on here? Why is none of this? Well, I knew why, because, you know, I've been in the game long enough. And so I did what I could in the time I had, as well as covering the basics that I have to cover, that, you know, all the stuff that Lonely Planet normally does. I tried to add to that. And one of the things I as I mentioned to you is, like, I put in a few trail maps within the guidebook where you can go on walks and whatever to explore Muslim food, go and wander around Muslim villages in the south, and in this case the historical forts, and even the tomb of a sultan whose name happens to be Sultan Suleiman Shah. And every time I mention that, obviously the Ertugrul fans get very excited, but it's not. This is a Persian Thai sultan who's buried there, whose tomb I visited and found, and not found. Again, I've done it again, right? I didn't
You
find
discovered
nothing.
it. You didn't find it.
I didn't discover it. I just went and wrote about it, right? And I put it into the guidebook. And as part of that trail, the guidebook that I put it in, it went to publish, and then COVID came. So there was about 6 books that I was contributing to about Thailand, because Thailand's the bestseller for Lonely Planet, that have all been put on hold permanently because of COVID. And I don't know if you're aware, but Lonely Planet is going through a massive transition now. It shut down a lot of its offices. It's been bought by a new digital company, and so the future is quite uncertain. And from a very selfish perspective, I'm absolutely gutted, because all that stuff I did on Muslim Thailand may never see the light of day. So I really
Can you not repurpose it anywhere else?
No, it's not mine. Yeah, and when I do that kind of research, Lonely Planet owns it all, so it's entirely up to them what they want to do with it. But rumor has it that when they do, get back on their feet, because Lonely Planet Thailand is one of their best sellers, they will probably publish their best sellers again. But they will have to do an update, because for 2 years it will be 2 years once they go for it. They'll have to do an update, because a lot of the research I did, businesses might not have survived. Places have changed. New rules have come in. So they'll still have to do some research before they can publish that. But I was really excited about that, because I had so much stuff in there that was fresh.
If you accidentally leave your laptop unlocked, the Muslim Vibe might have an exclusive Thailand series that we push out.
And then I'll get sued, because this is all being recorded.
With an unnamed source. It's fine. We can throw you on. It's a necessary evil, I think.
Exactly,
you can go to jail, and
Yeah. So, but that was amazing. Like, one of the things that I remember coming back with, and people didn't realize, is a lot of people go to Thai restaurants and they love the masaman curry, and a lot of people don't realize that comes from the word Musulman. Yeah.
I can always hear it afterwards.
Yeah,
like, you never know it until
but
someone says it.
It's in front of your eyes, but until somebody points it out. And then when I started looking into the historicity of it, and I went to the areas where this dish evolved, it's because it came from Persian culture. So this is something that a lot of people also didn't realize. It came from Persian culture, because the kind of post-medieval Thai empires, they were fascinated by Persian court culture. So they would like mimic the rituals. They had like Persian travelers at their courts. They had Muslim travelers from all over the world at their courts. And this is how the food came in, as well as items of clothing, various traditions, which I put into the book that may never be published.
Well, I'm glad that we got some of it at least.
Yeah.
So now coming on to Minarets in the Mountains,
A book that will be published.
Inshallah. What's the story there? This is you going through Europe, and I guess again, I was going to use the word for you, discovering. Let's use it. But no, I mean. Putting in writing, documenting.
Yeah, that's a good word.
Muslim heritage in Europe.
Yeah.
So what was the project about, and how did it all come together?
So the project was a very personal one, because as you know, Salim, it was with my family. So my family and I were on a road trip through the summer, and I deliberately wanted to take them to a part of Europe that had an indigenous living Muslim heritage and culture. This is the big difference. All of us now have some inkling of something went down in Spain, and we know that there were Muslims there at one point, but we know they're not there anymore. Not the original ones. Of course, there's loads of Moroccan Muslims there now. North African Muslims. So I wanted to take my children and my family on a journey whilst doing the research, but also give them that experience of recognizing that they have their own indigenous Muslim heritage as Europeans, and that was really important for me. But I also wanted them to recognize that this part of Europe, which is the Western Balkans, countries like Serbia, Albania, Kosovo, Bosnia, I wanted them to recognize that these countries are actually Europe as well, regardless of the way in which there's this dichotomy that's been created, this split that's been created, where when we talk about those countries, we have to qualify it with Eastern Europe. Nobody ever tells me to qualify Germany with Western Europe. Do you know what I mean? So it was going to be an experience for them, but of course for me it was also going to be the premise of a book, because I wanted to do something that would enter the mainstream. This stuff is in academia. You can go and find this stuff on bookshelves in academia, but I wanted to put something in the popular mainstream that everybody could access and engage with, that would allow them to popularize the notion that there is a living indigenous Muslim culture. In fact, yesterday I was talking to my Bosnian friend, and he was saying, it just occurred to me, Muslims are more indigenous to Europe than white people are to America. I was like, bro, don't be saying that too loud. Do you know what I mean? But it's true, right? When you think about it. right? The white colonial powers that went to the US, they're what, 300, 400 years old max? Whereas Muslims have been here since the 8th century, 7th century. You know what I mean? And the Muslims that I went and visited, their descendants go back at least 500-600 years. So it was about normalizing that.
It's interesting. We had Amra, who is an author on the podcast, Bosnian author, and she was writing about her experience surviving the genocide and everything that took place. And we had a little conversation on that podcast episode about how, you know, Muslims from that region, for us and for the majority, don't look Muslim, they look European, and they're very much overlooked. And like you talk about how indigenous they are to Europe, we kind of overlook that historically. And I think even as Muslims, they're not seen as like the right type of, they don't look Muslim, so we completely overlook them.
But why is that?
I don't know. You're the expert.
This is one of the things. Yeah, this is one of the things that I tried to argue. Obviously, there are probably a number of reasons, but I think one of the reasons is because they have deliberately been othered in the European narrative. You know, when you look at what Europe is, these guys, and it's not just the Muslims here. We're talking about just Eastern Europe generally. It's been othered, and so my kind of thesis, argument, whatever you want to call it, in the book. Is to make the point that maybe it's been othered because it was historically Muslim, you know, because the whole region was historically the Ottoman Muslim Empire, and so from about the 14th century up until the early 20th century, this whole part of Europe was Muslim.
Would you go so far as to say that historians have lied?
I wouldn't say they've lied. We've had incidents where they've bent the truth and historians have deliberately left certain bits of information out. Yeah. Okay. But I think the way in which that part of Europe has been presented to us, it's been deliberately kept at arm's length, and it's been deliberately seen as something different to what they deem to be Europe. But
why would you not go so far as to say that they've lied? The reason I'm asking is because what I would argue is that systematically a narrative has been put in place to other Bosnian Muslims, hence leading to the genocide that took place and everything else that happened there. Right. You've spoken about othering the same way that Amra did. And this whole narrative that has existed has led to people being killed and everything else, but also this lack of appreciation and acknowledgement of the rich history that does exist. And I think with more of that and more of appreciation and acceptance at a systematic level, we wouldn't have the modern problems we have in that region and generally speaking. So do you not think it's
they've been selective is the best way to say it, Salim, without kind of, because, you know,
you're doing PR for them right now.
Then I would suggest that I've read all of the history of that region, and I haven't, because most of it is written in a language I can't access. Yeah. Let's be blunt. But where I have written history that has been very, very selective, it's clearly left out certain bits of information. And what people also need to recognize is history isn't science. It's not facts. It's interpretation of certain facts, maybe. Yeah. And so it's about how that's interpreted. And some people listening are going to say, yeah, this is about your interpretation. And it is. That's right. This is my interpretation of that history. And you might not agree with it. But if that interpretation is based on certain facts, it's going to be difficult for you to denounce that. Okay, so for example, we were talking off air. One of the facts is the Mostar Bridge, the beautiful Mostar Bridge in Mostar, was built by Ottomans. Yet, up until the early 20th century, we had travel writers, historians, even apparent architectural experts from the West claiming it was built by Romans, because they just could not accept that Muslims could build something so beautiful, even though there was inscriptions on the bridge that said Sultan Suleiman. They said, "Oh, this has been faked," and you know they've scrubbed out the original Latin ones. And one female travel writer, English travel writer, she turned around and described it something, and I'm paraphrasing, something along the lines of, you know, it's kind of this Latin architectural marvel in the midst of barbarism. And I kind of borrow that to call my chapter for that particular visit a bridge amongst barbarism, or the barbaric bridge, or something like that, off the top of my head. But yeah, it's that kind of.
So this isn't. This isn't a travel book that you've written. It's more of like a.
It's travel literature, we call it.
Travel literature.
So it's not a guidebook.
It's not a guidebook. Yeah.
So there's guidebooks. Obviously, that's for somebody else to carry around. But this is what is known as armchair travel. So in other words, you go on a journey with me by reading it. It's travel literature. It's what people like William Dalrymple historically wrote. Eric Newby, Bill Bryson, all these people. And so it's armchair travel. You're meant to. You don't have to leave in order to experience the place because they're taking you.
And I guess the names you just mentioned are very alien to me, and I feel for a lot of Muslims who predominantly probably will be listening to this, also alien to them.
Oh, of course.
As will the notion of armchair traveling in this way. Like I know, is it Jack Kerouac who's got the book, the famous book where he went from the East Coast to the West Coast of America on a motorbike. Am I right with that, Sam? You impressed that I know that. But yeah, no. So
there's that famous guy, Leveson Wood, who's all over the TV. Walks Afghanistan.
No, see, you've lost me on that one.
You again? All right, okay. Ben Fogle on the telly. Still not there.
Ben Foster, goalkeeper.
Jack Whitehall with his dad.
There we go. Now we're talking.
And you had to keep dropping it.
We got there.
Until we got to trash TV.
we got there in the end.
Yeah, but essentially that's what it is.
No, but I mean that's the thing. But like I feel like this whole genre and this whole thing. What's the? It sounds like a silly question, but what's the benefit in reading this? Like what someone picking up your book who hasn't read travel writing, because I know, as you said, in the mainstream, this is a book for the mainstream, not just for Muslims. People will appreciate your own personal bias and nuance and learn a different
journey.
and your journey, and learn a different take on history, but also like through the lens of your eyes.
Exactly.
But for someone who hasn't come across this kind of work before. What's
the attraction?
What's the attraction?
Yeah. So the attraction is obviously that you are actually on a journey with us.
Yeah.
And so when we experience certain things, when we meet certain characters, it's not just dry history throughout this. We turn up in places like, for example, we turned up in one place called Novi Pazar in the south of Serbia. Now, Serbia, to everyone, is an Orthodox Christian country. We turn up in this town and we've ordered some pizza and there's sausage on it, and we're like, okay, look, sausage means pork to us, right? We're from the West, and from Western Europe. So I asked the question, is this pork? And the guy laughed. He laughed at us. He laughed at me and said, don't you know you're in a Muslim town? And I was like, what do you mean a Muslim town? I'd seen a few minarets, but apparently the whole town is more or less Muslim. This is in the south of Serbia. Wow. And so you have moments like that, and then we're eating the pizza and we're sitting in this town square, and suddenly there's this stage set up, and we're wondering, what is this stage about? Like when you go to Trafalgar Square in the summer and there's stages, and we're thinking, I wonder what's going to be. This whole choir of Muslim girls turns up and starts singing these nasheeds in the middle of the square in a Serbian town.
Wow.
So you're not just going to learn about how great Sultan Suleiman was, if indeed he was great, or Mimar. You're also going to learn about these actual experiences that you probably experienced on your travels, and you're hopefully going to laugh with us, and you're going to cry with us, and you're going to feel sad. So it's about the journey as well. But interwoven into that is, of course, the history, the heritage, the questions I ask, because this is also a journey of a British Muslim family wondering what it means to be Muslim and European today. So that's the narrative theme that's running through as well.
And for people who don't want to buy the book, what's the conclusion? What does it mean?
There is no conclusion. We ain't getting that kind of spoiler. You didn't pay me enough.
Well, no, but genuinely, I mean, that question to you, like, when it comes to being a British Muslim, and everyone's sick to death of hearing this, are you British first or Muslim first? But what's your take generally on Muslim history heritage in Europe? Is there enough to be celebrated, and is it a real thing, or are we just clutching at straws?
I mean, I've written a whole book over nearly 100,000 words. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, clearly I believe that.
Compelling enough argument.
You know what, Salim? I am only chipping away at the tip of the iceberg. And that tells you what you need to know. There is so much of it. So much of it is ill-explored. The Baltic story that I told you about that took me to America. That's got nothing to do with the Ottomans. There's a whole book there as well. I'm not going to give away all my ideas in case somebody else runs off and writes them. But there's the Spanish stuff. There's the Portuguese stuff. There's the Sicilian stuff. There's the stuff in Britain that I did the trails on. There's loads of people researching all of that.
Do you think there's enough people currently looking at this stuff, or no?
Well, obviously, because move in those circles. I
Yeah.
know of,
Okay, so for you, it's like everyone's doing it, but I guess
no, not everyone. I know the nerds. I know the historians.
Yeah.
I know the people that are into this, because it's a small circle and we keep bumping into each other at conventions.
trying to discover like new things.
Conventions and stuff. So I know the people doing this. There's obviously not enough people doing it.
Yeah.
But if you were to ask, well, what makes what I'm doing different to what they're doing, is I guess my kind of USP, if there is one, is I want it to become a part of the normalized mainstream narrative, and one of the ways I do that is I try to bring it to the fore through things like travel writing.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what I'm really keen to do. But there are so many questions about our heritage in the West that we haven't answered. I'm sure you're aware of the fact that there's a gold coin sitting in the British Museum that has the Shahada on it, and it was minted by an Anglo-Saxon king. What the hell is going on there? You know, one of the historians was joking the other day. He can see a whole kind of Ertugrul style, drama being made about some sultanate in the UK back then. Can you imagine? So there is so much stuff that has been ill-explored, misrepresented, and, for want of a better word, suppressed.
And I think it's, I guess, in a sense, quite noble of you to try and take the fight public. And I say public, sorry, I mean mainstream, because it's one thing for us on like the inside to acknowledge these histories and to know these things, but then to have that, and I think when we talked about narratives and like on a broad scale things changing, I guess what you're trying to achieve is for the norm to be a different perspective and lens by which people look at things, or at least a more nuanced one,
a more wholesome one. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
that's really all I'm trying to do, and I think noble's quite a strong word, and I
can retract it if you want.
Yeah. Let's take that out. Right, but no, you're spot on. It is something that is very challenging, and none of this has been without challenges. It's been very difficult sometimes to get the support. It's been very difficult to write about this stuff, even to get a publisher. It's been very, very tough, and it's a very lonely space in that respect. But at the same time, of course, there is that part of me that's thinking this is very necessary. I'm a father. I've got children. They're the next generation. I don't want them to have all the same issues that we had. About belonging, identity, all of that. I want them to know a bit more of the picture. I don't pretend that I'm going to somehow present the entire picture, but I'm going to tell them that there is another picture that they can look at as well. This is not to completely discount the existing history at all, or the existing narratives. It's just to say that we need to have all of these narratives there so that people can select the ones that they want to relate and connect with, rather than appear invisible in the narrative, which is what's happening a lot at the moment.
That's awesome. And with regards to the book, when does it come out?
So the book went out on pre-order. Something you failed to mention is that it became a top 10 bestseller.
I was waiting for you.
I noticed that you kind of...
I'll go my intro, don't worry.
Yeah, so when it went out on pre-order, and in the first week it did really well, which blew my mind.
Awesome.
Absolutely blew my mind. And the real reason I'm mentioning it is because I think, even for somebody like me who's unknown, just to have a topic like that on the mainstream shelf, the reason it did so well is because of the hunger people have for this stuff right now. And so when it went out on pre-sale, it was about, I think, 2 weeks ago, but it will officially be available in June. But it's available to order on pre-order all over Amazon and Waterstones and WH Smith and all these places.
We can put the links in the description, but I think that's great, man. Like I think for me personally, one thing I love is just the journey that you've been on, the fact that we touched base 5-6 years ago,
exactly,
when the Muslim Vibe had just started out, and you were writing for us.
I was just starting out with travel writing,
and you were just starting out with travel writing, and now we're here on this amazing podcast in this swanky
amazing studio in central London next to Oxford Circus, and
there's BBC next door doing their thing. Exactly. But no, thank you so much for coming out here, man. Really appreciate it.
I thoroughly appreciate the love and support you've shown. And one of the things I do want to say is I do want to shout out to the love and support from the community, because the reason it did so well in pre-sales is because the community got behind it as well.
100%, man.
Including yourselves.
Awesome. I need to order my coffee now. As soon as we're done.
You still ain't ordered it. He told me he ordered it. This is shocking. I hope you got that on.
All right, bro. Thank you very much for your time, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it, man.
Thank you.